All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Lucio from Katalon, and today we have for you a webinar titled AI, the fourth Amigo in Agile Software Development. In this webinar today, we're going to learn how to give AI the structured data it needs to avoid effects. We're going to understand how to target AI test generation to find bugs that are often missed. And last but not least, we're going to discover how AI can automate individual tasks without introducing silos, miscommunications, and lengthy feedback loops. Today with us we have Rich Jordan from Curiosity Software. He is an enterprise solutions architect. Hello, Rich. Welcome to the webinar, and thank you for being here.
Hey, Lucio. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And we also from Curiosity Software have George Blundell, a technical analyst. Hey, George. Good morning.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you here. And last but not least, from Katalon, we have Mush Honda, our chief quality architect. Hey, Mush. Good to see you again.
Hey, Lucio. Glad to have me here. Thank you for having me on.
Excellent. Happy to have you here. All right. So before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items for the audience. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on demand on our webinars page. I will share the link with you later. So if for the unlikely event that you need to jump off, you can always catch up where you left off by watching the recording. Also, we will have a Q&A session at the end, but please don't wait until then to post your questions. Use the Q&A button that you will see in the interface, in the Zoom interface that you're using to watch this webinar. Go ahead and put all your questions in there so we can start addressing for you the questions before the Q&A session. And also, we encourage you to continue the conversation in the chat window of the webinar. If you have any comments, any feedback, anything that you want to add to the conversation, you're more than welcome to engage in there. With that said, I will go ahead and pass the time to you, Richard and George and Mush.
Thanks a lot, Lucio. So let's start off and a quick run through of kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of the kind of the more general problems within testing that you'll see, kind of analogous to AI. Some of the real challenges that we hear about and our customers hear about quite a lot. Then we'll talk to some of the opportunities that AI brings in the world of testing, but also to bring some reality to that, some of the obvious challenges that actually adopting AI can bring to organizations and some of the barriers to entry of AI when it comes to testing, and some of the solutions we've come up with. And then we'll get on to the stuff that you really come here to see, which is kind of demos of the solutions offerings from both Curiosity and Katalon when it comes to AI within testing. All right, so without further ado, let's get going. I can get the slides working properly. So we talked about some of the kind of more general problems when it comes to testing. I'm sure many of you in the testing industry and many of your stakeholders strive for more efficient and effective testing. And an obvious thing to start concentrating on then in a lot of the conversation, again, through tool vendors or through kind of LinkedIn conversations, is around how to make testing more automated. And straight away we make a beeline for test execution. I think one of the elephant in the rooms there is, although we spend a lot of our time and effort thinking about and kind of evangelizing around these things, actually the numbers tell us that our actual ability to implement these things is a bit rubbish, to be honest. If you look at the World Quality Report from last year, 15 to 20% of all tests that are executed are actually through automation. And far that's far lower than what organizations strive for, regardless of whether you're in the kind of the checking or the testing camp. It's a number that's probably a bit too low for the amount of conversation, the amount of effort that goes into actually making test execution more effective and more efficient. That number applies again to regression testing. You might say that's the sweet spot when it comes to automation, but again, that number is just too low. Okay. And so as we progress through this talk, we'll talk about some of the opportunities and some of the ways that AI can actually face into that. Another one of the challenges, and maybe passing on to some of the reasons why test execution is so low, is around what testers spend their time doing. I think one of the misperceptions of a lot of stakeholders of testing is that testers spend all of their time actually executing tests. They don't. Well, we'll come on to what we actually do, but actually a lot of the testers that we surveyed, and this is an example of that survey, suggests that actually test execution is only a fraction of what testers spend their time doing. And actually, the majority of the time, testers spend their time trying to understand actually what the system does, what the change we're trying to make for the next iteration is actually doing, and what's the impact of that change. All right. And I think there's a link there in terms of what testers are actually spending their time doing and why that test execution number is so low, right? To get good test execution through automation, you need stability, you need repeatability. If you're spending a lot of time trying to understand what that system is doing, and let's face it, not always really understanding what that system is doing, chances are your automation numbers are not going to be that great, right? And I think there is a correlation between what this number is saying and what those world quality report numbers are saying. All right. At this point in time, we're going to run a quick poll for you, just to understand what the audience sees in terms of correlation to these numbers here. So without further ado, I want to ask the audience exactly the same question that I've just posed on that slide there, in terms of what do you or your test teams spend the majority of your time in your organization doing? You should have seen numbers pop up, and I'm seeing some responses coming in now. Please don't feel like I've prompted you into giving me the answer that I've kind of prompted. It's an anonymous survey. I'm sure you're very confident in giving your own answer anyway as to what you want to do, and we can see the numbers coming through now. I'm not sure you can see that on your screen at the moment, but we've got a high number coming in for a comprehension of system, which is what we found, and we've got a high number of test script creation and maintenance. Again, evidence and reporting, other things are low. Waiting to test is low. Test execution 17%, which kind of fits into the kind of the lower band. So we'll quickly end the poll there, and hopefully I can share the results with you. All right, so just to walk through, as I mentioned, the audience does correlate with some of the findings that we found. I think you're feeling the pain that I think I've been talking to here around. You spend a lot of your time, yes, trying to understand the system, yes, trying to understand what the change is doing, but also spending probably too much time maintaining your test assets because of those changes coming in. All right, so I think we're on the same page when it comes to common challenges, which is a good thing. Okay, so let's carry on. So what are some of the ways that the AI can actually help with facing into some of these challenges? All right, so you'll see a slide here, and you'll see not just test execution, but you'll see the kind of a life cycle of delivery with the DevOps infinity loop there, and you'll see it more aligned to testing. All right. Now, through Curiosity, if you're not familiar with what we do, we do model-based testing and model-based testing tools. And if you're not familiar with that, think visualization of your business process flow or your API flows or your test assets, for example, visualizing how the system should work or what you should be testing. And so straight away, we're talking about how do you make transparent, if you like, how do you collaborate with your product owners, your designers, your developers, your testers. Here we're talking about BDD and the 3 Amigos in terms of visualizing what the system should do, so you get a lot more stability, flexibility, stability, repeatability out of how your system should be working. All right. Now, through these collaborative conversations, what we've built within Curiosity is an AI capability where you can use generative AI to prompt or use prompt engineering to create scenarios to build visual models around what a system should be doing, is one scenario there. Also, what we've also started to create is a capability around querying understanding of how systems should work. So by this, we mean, how do you take disparate sources of information from your organization and actually pull that into one specific area of understanding, pooling of knowledge, corpus of information, if you like. If you imagine an organization has lots of disparate sources of information, it's very hard to understand where that information comes from, hence why it takes so long to maintain or get an understanding of how a system works, how a system's to change. All right, so we're talking about how do you use AI to pool a hell of a lot of disparate information. Some of the information might not be complete, some of it might not be available, but how do you use AI to do a lot of the grunt work, if you like, the assistance work, to pull that information together? Once you've got all that stuff, you've got a hell of a lot of repeatability, a lot of transparency around how the system should work, and then you're into a place where you can actually exploit that in terms of creating automated test assets through things like Katalon, all right, or through other test automation execution capabilities. All right, so here, this is really how we harness the power of AI, if you like, through a collaborative development conversation. Hence the title of this, the 3 amigos. Normally, when you're talking about BDD, the 4 amigos when you start to use AI as a co-pilot to what we're actually talking about here. Hope that makes sense. Obviously, we'll come on to examples about how we bring that to life in the future. Look forward to that. Okay, but when we're talking about generative AI, there comes with challenges, all right? And the underlying challenge under that is around large language models, all right? So I'm sure everybody's been onto ChatGPT and asked it some very real-world questions. How do you make a cup of tea is the example that I always go back to, right? And it does a brilliant, amazing job of coming back with a really good example around how to make a cup of tea, all right? And it's a bit of a wow factor in terms of demoing, right? You can ask it to create a cup of tea in JSON, for example, and it will go off and do that, all right? It can go and create a certain script within a certain language. It will do all of these things, right? But the real challenge when it comes to LLMs and how that manifests itself in an organization is how often do you actually test for a cup of tea in your organization, in your day-to-day job, all right? You never do, right? And your problem is that in order to do your testing, you need a hell of a lot of organizational context. Yeah, how do your systems work? How do your systems have been configured? What are your standards, your processes within your organizational context, all right? And the big problem with public LLMs is that they just don't know this information, all right? And conversely, your group security function has been challenging this kind of freedom of information for a long time, okay? And therefore, that information just isn't freely available to public LLMs today. And there's a big barrier or a hurdle to entry in terms of that information becoming available to public LLMs, big no, but private LLMs in terms of building up that capability, all right? Because a lot of that knowledge today is stored in test case management systems, or it's stored on Confluence, for example, or it's stored in Jira, all right? A lot of that information isn't available to LLMs, and actually a lot of that information is head knowledge, all right? And therefore it isn't even codified. All right, and then hence, how do you get the information to a source so that it can be used by generative AI? That's a big challenge. All right. So just touching on some of these things and some of the problems, ramifications of that is a lot of this information, as I say, is in people's heads. It's not codified. A lot of this information is static, and therefore it's inaccurate or it's out of date. All right. And a lot of it is unstructured. All right. Confluence pages, they're great for sharing things, but ultimately they are electronic word, all right? They aren't entirely structured, and they're not very queryable, all right? And therefore there is a big challenge when it comes to using AI capabilities in LLMs around the danger of hallucination, all right? And therefore that's one of the big things around where we think AI plays a role in terms of, you know, we're not deferring testing to an AI capability. Actually, we're using AI as a co-pilot, a fourth amigo, if you like, to accelerate what we're doing, to give us a better understanding of what we're doing. All right, because there is a big danger around the ecosystem, if you like, of knowledge within organizations, which means hallucinations are highly likely. Yeah, lots of out-of-date information, lots of unstructured information, lots of noisy data. Lots of head knowledge, which means that actually what you're asking your LLM to do today, it might not just have access to the corpus of information to be able to give a sufficient answer, whatever that means. Okay. I've talked about some of these challenges, but just to kind of bring around some more clarity around that. We talk a lot about kind of public LLMs and private LLMs. Obviously, security is a big thing when it comes to how to exploit AI. And the reality is a lot of private LLMs are immature today. And so there is a trade-off between the richness of information that a public LLM has got versus the private and security aspects of the private LLM. And so, for example, we're working with a lot of customers at the moment that are starting to build up their own private LLMs. And so it gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of working with them around their company information, if you like, or their system information, and allows us to be a lot richer in terms of creating visual models, for example. All right. Then we talk about governance and coverage. Again, we're talking to how much can you trust the LLM or the AI to come up with the right answer. The reality is that you need transparency. All right, and you need an audit trail around what the AI has done to make sure that it's doing what you expect it to do, or it's giving you the information that you need it to, and you can see why it came up with that answer through some kind of audit trail. All right. And another problem there is around how do you make sure that that underlying information is up to date? All right. It's the same problem when it comes to a lot of the document sources that I've already talked about. A lot of these things become stale very quickly. And let's face it, with Agile and DevOps, organizations are wanting to change more and more frequently, which means the danger of things being more and more out of date just is more acute. All right, and so your AI strategy needs to bear in mind how to keep that underlying corpus of information relevant to what your systems are doing or what your processes are changing. All right, it's a big factor. At this point, I'll just hand over to Mush to give a bit of update around what Katalon are thinking around in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rich. This was awesome. I think just looking back at the responses of the poll that we got just in this discussion as well, and looking at what you've pointed out rightfully about the challenges of LLMs as a modeling / assistant tool, right? I think the key factor that all of us in the audience as testers should think about is, the software delivery lifecycle process, particularly Agile, is going to stay human-centric, right? It's not where AI is actually going to be a replacement. Hence, when we were talking about the whole Amigo setup, right? That's why they are the fourth Amigo coming in to help accelerate what we do, right? And I think it's interesting, based on the poll that we heard, the effort and the energy that most teams face, even we are under pressure all the time to deliver faster with more capabilities, more features. Tools such as Copilot is being used by developers coming in and pumping more code in for us to test more. Quite honestly, that puts that pressure even greater for us to deliver with the said confidence in the software that is being released. And the key thing that I think we have to think and keep in mind when we apply and adopt AI really is the philosophy that, because of this sheer volume and the increasing complexity with the quote-unquote intelligent systems coming alive, right? There's always going to be increased ambiguity among clear, requirements gathering, right? And I think that's very true even in the effort as prior polls have suggested, right? That's the reason why we're constantly going back to make sure we understand the impact of the changes, as well as what precisely are we trying to accomplish with newer features. I think the key area that from a Katalon perspective, I would say, right, is we are trying to minimize the dependency on the technical abilities that are also growing in terms of knowing how to use these tools, and putting that as a powerful tool into the hands of the testers to sort of supplement the heavy lifting that is typically involved in the analysis, as well as the setup of the testing, right? And that's where I think seeing, as part of the demo that we'll do today, seeing how well the integration between Curiosity software from a modeling perspective of situations and scenarios, how easy it is to have that generated into like different test scenarios, and we'll be definitely showing a lot more of how that comes into Katalon from an execution perspective, but then also looking at what else could you do to take that to the next level, right? Be it from understanding the code that has been deciphered in terms of the scenarios that have come into Katalon as an example, or more importantly, how ready are we to actually release, right? Given the increased complexities, as I mentioned, given the challenge of time to market that all of us face, we'll definitely look at how we can shorten the feedback of issues and concerns that we find as part of testing, and more importantly, help get the business value from development and engineering teams in general, collectively with us as testers in that mix, to get that real business value over. So we'll definitely look at that as well.
Oh, thank you. So I mentioned big challenge around LLMs and kind of public LLMs. How do you get that business information into AI so that it can actually do something a bit more useful than ask it how to make a cup of tea? And so what we'll demo, or George will demo a bit later on, is a capability where we're bringing those capabilities together in terms of a broader LLM with a lot of underlying useful information. One of the use cases I'll always talk about is we're working with a couple of customers where English isn't their first language, and therefore obviously they would prefer to work within a different language, and therefore the benefits of the broader LLM is they can just do that. All right, they can ask prompts in that language and it will respond, it will translate in those languages, which is awesome. But again, it still doesn't understand the context of their organization, and so what you see here is one of the an architectural solution that we've built up around Model GPT. So if we provide Modeler, which is our model-based testing tool, Model GPT is the AI capability that exploits an underlying LLM, all right, through prompts, and you'll see that in a demo that George will give later on. But what we're doing here is we're providing an option either to go straight to the LLM, or actually there's an interim step by which we're able to poll, if you like, internal knowledge stores of an organization to enhance the prompt or the understanding of what the AI capability knows. Through this, essentially what we'll show in the demo is our capability using or integrating with Jira, where we essentially pull information around a banking function to ask generative AI prompts around coming up with solutions that are held with it, where the information is held within Jira. All right, so the LLM in itself wouldn't know anything about this thing. What we're doing is we're mixing, if you like, the information stored within Jira or any other knowledge store within an organization, and using the power of the underlying LLM to provide the prompt and the reasoning based on the information that we're passing to it. All right, so we'll show that in the demo in a bit, but it's just to give a bit of an architectural, if you like, understanding around how the demo is working in terms of providing information that is relevant to the organizational context, whilst exploiting the underlying generative AI capability that you'll see through the likes of ChatGPT, for example. All right. Just to bring a more of a kind of a business contextual feel to exactly what I've just been saying there and some of the solution capabilities. Obviously, we've been talking about a lot around requirements or design solutioning or engineering. And so really bringing forward the power of visual modeling, the fourth Amigo and generative AI to use prompt engineering to both create visual models, but also query and reason with those models. So how can you use generative AI to ask Model GPT certain questions around certain models, so business rules, for example, that exist within certain models, and get a response that you might expect from a developer, for example, but actually we're using generative AI and the rules that are held within those models to provide that information to testers to give them more clarity around how that system should be working. All right. We'll also look at the example I've just mentioned previous around using Jira to ask information around different tickets that are held within disparate sources of information within the organization. And you'll see that through a prompt analysis where we're getting reasoning and questions, and importantly, auditability and transparency around where that information came from. Okay, so again, you'll see whether it came from Jira or where it came from existing models. So we're bringing different sources of information together. And then what we'll do is we'll move on to integrating both visual models into an execution capability. All right, so that's a little flavor of kind of the demos that we're hopefully going to show you in the next part of this session. So quickly over to Mush.
Yep. So on this slide, essentially what I wanted to show the audience is just how we are looking at Katalon being the end-to-end solution, almost like a centralized hub as well, as an overall platform for all things testing, right? I think all of us know the pressure, especially in an agile setup, right? The pressure to give, the common term is fail fast. I try to think of it as learn fast, right? Because you want to make sure that you're giving that feedback as early as possible back to the development team, who would be able to, respond to the concerns and observations we, from a testing perspective, are making. So looking at all of the different components of our platform, right? We've got a pretty robust IDE setup in Katalon Studio. It's got a lot of AI-assisted acknowledged, interpreted, integrated capabilities with Studio Assist. We do use a lot of proprietary AI on the visual testing side. We've also leveraged a lot of GPT style capabilities, with plugins that enable you to really look at Jira requirements and have them easily converted into manual test steps, which you can then play and put into Katalon Studio to actually create the scripts dynamically. And we've got a new feature that actually became public beta yesterday, something called True Test, which also looks at the overall cycle of how your systems in production are actually being used. And it's got the ability to give you a visual indicator of just the general flow of traffic and interactions that are occurring on your system, and then has an easy way of converting all of that knowledge back into regression tests that you could run in any of the lower environments. And I think that is important because, as going back to the poll that we saw, right, a lot of effort is being spent on maintenance and system impacts. A lot of these auto-generated regression scripts indicate and leverage the confidence we would have when we are observing the actual usage of our system in production. And what it does is it actually takes all of that in and enables you to supplement that with your testing. And what that basically does from a tester's perspective is it lets you focus on the impacts of the new features, and also gives you high confidence that, well, what are the high priority business-centric workflows that are currently in the system, and they are easily part of your test suite to enable you to make sure that they behave and the functionality is not impacted with any of the changes coming in. So a lot of that comes in. I think the key part over here is using all of that and ultimately also looking at it in a consolidated way with reporting. So we've got a lot of capabilities there. We have another beta out right now called the Virtual Data Analyst, which essentially takes all of your observations of executions, defects identified, script failures, relative time to launch in terms of your release cycles, and gives you a release readiness report. It also gives you analytics in terms of what could be the potential issues that are there with the reasons why your tests are failing, classifying them into groups, giving you insights into what could be done to make sure that you are meeting your set quality expectations. So a lot of that pretty much uses a lot of AI that we are actively bringing in, and then you can see we go through the entire sort of delivery life cycle, from all the way from designing all the way through production. Cool.
Sounds like we should get to some demos.
Absolutely.
George, are you ready?
Yep. Thanks a lot, guys. So let me come in and just take the screen. Okay, so I'm going to spend sort of 10 minutes or so just kind of running you through Test Model, or our model-based testing platform. Specifically, we're going to look at a couple of use cases, right? So first, we're going to look at how we can harness LLMs and all of the great AI technology out of there to build our models. And then I'm going to show you how actually we can create and generate and integrate with Katalon and push out tests to execute it inside of that platform. Now, where I'm going to start is actually by looking at the AI. So what I've done here, just before we hopped on, is I just ran a few prompts against what we call Model GPT. It's basically a piece of AI functionality that will allow you to ask questions of the AI, and the AI will come back and give you its response in a model-based format. So what I've done is entered a prompt around booking a flight. So there's a few things in here about departure, arrival destinations, and some dates and return dates. We've sent off that request to the AI, and it's come back with a model format. So if I open this up, we'll basically see that instead of what you might see in sort of ChatGPT, where it gives a kind of a written format, it's actually come back in a model format. So if we take a look at this, you'll see that we've got a few associated steps where, first of all, we're starting the flow. Then we're entering different departure arrival dates, selecting different departure and return dates, et cetera, until eventually we go through and do a payment and either confirm or display some kind of error. Now, within this model, we're actually started to use the AI to populate the test data that we want to use. So in the model that's come back, we've actually said that, okay, well, we want the departure date to be 1st of September and the return date to be the 10th of September. And that's starting to build up the test assets that we can then generate from inside of this model. Now, naturally, as you're using AI, it's built to kind of give feedback loops and build on the response that it's giving you. What we're looking at right now is ChatGPT, basically, so that the public-facing AI. As Rich mentioned, right, we're working with customers who are now actually taking those AI models and bringing them internal, so that actually those AIs are being taught on your specific information about the organization. So that could be things like coding standards. It could be the business rules that you would know that exist within your applications. And what that does is over time, it actually builds up more knowledge within that AI that we can then use to query against to actually come in and build, for example, some of these models. So what we've done in this example is just add, okay, we want to have something about a premium seat. And then we've asked the AI to do a kind of self-improvement process and what could be done to improve the result. Now, after we run those couple of extra processes, the resulting model looks slightly different in that when we come through, you'll see that we've added some things around, okay, are these valid destinations? Are these valid dates? You'll also see, right, we added a question around, okay, well, which seat we can choose, right, regular or premium. And if the premium seat is chosen, then we can add 20% on the price for that. So now, typically in the past kind of 4 or 5 years that I've been doing this, the model building process either relies on existing materials or it relies on my specific knowledge around, around your application. So, typically that might be a manual process of actually coming in, manually dragging these blocks in and saying, okay, well, if I know a specific rule about my application, I can just come in and replicate this. Now, while that's still valuable, and actually the model really does help the three amigos actually collaborate in a more efficient way, because the model, the model-based solution is a much more visual example of your system, and it's actually a way to document business rules and business logic in a slightly different way. So while the model is helping all of those processes, where AI comes in is actually enabling us to increase the speed at which these models can be built. So instead now of me manually dragging and dropping, I can just come into our our querier here and push in sort of written requirements and get a model-based response back from the AI. Now, if we go over to this next example, this is where we're actually using now the model to build and run some Katalon tests. So in this particular model, it's kind of a simple example, right? It's just a login screen for our example banking application, literally username, password, click sign in. Now, what I did in this process is that, well, first I asked the AI, okay, can you build me a model that actually describes a basic login process? Pretty easy example, but it came up with something that looks a little bit like this. Then what I did is, using some of the object repositories from inside of Katalon, I then overlaid those keywords on top of the test model canvas. So if I come in and have a look here, the first step in this workflow is actually to come in and open the banking app. Now inside here, I've got an automation reference that basically is a Katalon keyword for opening the browser. And I've just given it a hard-coded value just to come in and spin up the application. Then we're going to go through and consider the username. So there's two scenarios, right? We could either go down a valid path or we could go down an invalid path. The valid path in this scenario has this data, so just jsmith@demo.io. And then what we're doing is we actually have a Katalon keyword in here that has a parameter. That parameter, we've given it the valid scenario in this example. So that will push us through into kind of our positive scenario or happy flow test case. And then a similar process happens with the rest of this model, right? With the passwords and clicking on our sign in button. Then we can use a test case generation engine to automatically create test cases from this model. To do this, I can just come into test generation, hit generate, and then that uses an algorithm to define the minimum number of paths required to meet a specified level of coverage. Now, I won't go into too much detail into how that works. If you want to find out more, we can send you a cool piece of documentation that runs you through that algorithm. But basically what it does is it minimizes the amount of work you need to do to generate the best set of test cases. So this has come through, created us 4 paths. We've got 1 happy path and 3 negative paths. And then we can come in here, hit run, and generate our associated automation code, which in this instance is going to be our Katalon keywords strung together into our Katalon scripts. Now, I will now hand over to Mush to kind of pick up and talk a little bit how the story continues when we move into Katalon.
Perfect. Thank you, George. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So as you guys see, this is the IDE Katalon Studio that I have up on my screen. And what George was talking about is how those zipped up folders actually come through. When you actually have that installed at your location and extract that out, you see it's basically got 2 folders, scripts and test cases. Basically everything that was generated from the modeler. When you actually go in and you import that in the containing folder for your project in Katalon Studio. I've done that already, but when you place those files in here, you will get these folders show up, as you see here, with the bank login workflows that George had previously. What I've also done is I've added a few more just to show you a few flavors on it. But let me quickly go in and show you what has happened when that has come through. So you can see I've got the bank login success workflow that was originally created. You can see that, because it was a fairly straightforward, simple project, you see all of the keywords that was generated by the modeler made it through here. And you can see these are all set up. You can see the credentials that were coming. Of course, you have other ways because of leveraging passwords to be more encrypted. You have all of that capabilities from a IDE perspective within Katalon Studio that you can tweak on there. But the interesting part about all of this is you don't have to write any code, and you let AI from the modeler come in and seamlessly have all of that created for you. In addition to this, something that I wanted to showcase was, if this was a scenario where you had a pretty complicated workflow and, over a period of time, this was something that was shared by members who are either moved on to other projects or were doing something, involved in other teams in your organization. One of the features that we have within Studio is called Studio Assist. And in essence, it's leveraging the capabilities of ChatGPT, something that you set up from your account directly with ChatGPT. Hence, you are in control of all of the security and privacy settings for it. You essentially right-click on it and go into the Studio Assist feature, and you could click on Explain Code. And you can see in real time as I'm doing that, it's actually going to read all of this and give me a summary of what is that code essentially doing for you. And in essence, what that really helps you do is, rather than spend time in your analysis of, hey, what is these sets of scripts doing for me, this quickly lets you, at a high level, get a summary of what are the different actions you can see. And, because this was a fairly straightforward scenario, you can see it says, hey, the code opens a web browser, username and password is entered, and then the sign in button is clicked, right? And you can see it's dynamically generated all of that. Let me also show you another alternative on this, right? So if you were, just looking at a high-level scenario, whether it was in Jira or whatnot, and you were thinking about, well, how do I create a test automation script in a similar fashion, right? I've used the bank login process as a similar thing. You can see what I did was I created a new test case, and in essence just put in comments there that talked about what was the automation scenario that I wanted to create, right? So in addition to what you get from the modeler, if there were additional ones that you wanted to quickly set up based on observations you've made or based on errors that you may have encountered when the other scripts ran and you found defects in your application under test, you could very easily come in here and just put in your scenario typed in a similar fashion as I have, right? You can see I've got the scenario of a successful login. I've also pointed out that the objects that the script should interact with are located under this folder structure, right? Object repository and login, right? And you can see it's the 3 buttons or object that you interact with on the page anyway, right? And then I'm just putting in simple instructions, right? Open the browser, navigate to that URL, click on the field, type in the value, click on the other field, type in the value. I could simply not even put the click, but I'm just, from a tester's perspective, looking at what I would do manually, right? And if I just highlight this and do the exact same thing on Studio Assist, where I say, hey, generate code for me this time, what you'll see is it will automatically create the entire test suite or test steps for you in code. And this is exactly how it looks like. So you can see it's got all of the keywords that are coming in. It's got all of the URLs that we provided to it. You can see it's using all of the correct naming that I've put in based on the names of the objects that are there. And this, in essence, is ready to go. So you could typically just run this now and the test case would start. I could probably kick it off as well, just so that way you guys can see it. I'm using Chrome as part of this, and it should start running. Something else to keep in mind also, right? We've got other AI built capabilities in there. If this was something that you wanted to run from a visual perspective, and you wanted to make sure that you had, make sure all of the look and feel across different browsers were identical, you could put in additional keywords in here, either from the set keywords that are there or using your instructions. Using ChatGPT in here as well to generate all of that for you, and ultimately take all of this in your test suites and use it to go to our test ops section, which is basically the overall operational command center, really, that gives you a holistic view of all of the testing activities and the release readiness that is happening. This is a quick look at another sample project that had some interesting data that I wanted to quickly show you how that looks at, right? So when you go into the test ops URL, you can see when you land in there, we have this new option for the dashboard that is, again, using AI to basically tell you what is happening in your project, right? So a common example here is, hey, there were some failures over a period of time that we saw. What were those errors about? When you click on that, it tells you, well, here's the snapshot of that, right? And you can see the top 10 errors that were encountered, right, based on 20 test cases, right, was this exception, right? And if you wanted to see what were the insights on that, you could simply click on that, and it'll tell you essentially why the system thinks those errors were encountered, and more importantly, what could you do about it, right? So typically in the context of this test case, it is saying, hey, it's recommended to remove this automation test case and execute it manually, because I think it's tied to the type of error that is happening in there, and you can see is, hey, it's not integrating with Jira X-Ray. So just different scenarios will come up, and you'll basically get the suggestion to recommendation of how you can fix the error, the criticality of the issue, the impact analysis. It's been running, this particular error, for example, has been seen in the last 20 days and so forth, right? But this is a quick look at how AI is being proactively used as a supplement to the activities that we as testers have to do, right? The dashboard is a good way of seeing all of the information around, hey, what is happening. You can also see in this example, there's the next sprint just started, which is going to finish in the next couple of weeks, right? So you can see, hey, this is, I've got essentially a little over 13 days left. We are in development right now. No testing has initiated yet. Behind that, there is another release coming in. No development or testing activity has been done. There's other insights over here, things such as, hey, how is the team's productivity in terms of test cases being created over a period of time? You can, change the lens level of what you want on it, and so forth. And then we've also got capabilities of, just tracking around what are the different flakiness factors of scripts that seem to be failing or passing. And you can see it's basically color coded to be able to say, well, right around this mark, we've got about 74 test cases in this case that typically fail about 40% of the time. And this all ties back to actually help you be very focused on, saving time and prioritizing what are the important actions that you as a tester needs to take to make sure that your release goes out on time, right? And another good way also, because we can execute on multiple environments, this is another look of saying, well, what are the statuses of failures and successful validations across all of the different systems that you may be wanting to test, in this case also across different browsers, right? So you've got a lot of good insights that are existing here. Looking at some of the other components, you can see we've got, more details if you wanted to get into it, right? To be able to say, well, how are my releases doing? How many test cases were run? What's the success ratio of that, right? We've got another interesting item for this particular project. We don't have that set up. I alluded to it, something called True Test, which gives you the user journey, essentially a visual display of how your production system is being used. We definitely have a follow-up webinar that is focused truly on that. That's coming up in the next couple of weeks. I would highly encourage you guys to join that to learn more about that. But DevOps in general lets you do all of those things. You can, also look at all of your tests that are tied to your CI/CD systems, to your repos with GitHub, things of that nature. You can see all of those components here. Everything that you've created within Studio shows up over here. You've also got the ability to schedule your runs and set up frequencies for when it is run. You can see this is a snapshot of when we've got different things in this example set up for execution. You've got detailed reports as well, right? So you can see, hey, when were the tests run? What were the profiles it covered, whether it was run in production, in staging, etc. What has been the execution trends? What's the coverage again? You can see how the test runs looked at. If you wanted to get into more granular insights into things, what have been the defects that exist? It's got a lot of good consolidated information where you don't have to jump through different systems to be able to do that. So this basically shows you how you can go through an entire life cycle, right? How do you shift left using the modeler or using some of the capabilities we've got out of Katalon to be able to start testing and start preparing for testing way sooner. And I think one of the key challenges we typically face as testers is when automation is in play, our default is to go to regression. one of the benefits of doing Agile is you want to do automation first with the new features in mind and not think about regression as a component, because that's already something that's in production. So using AI technology through two tests, through the modeler that Rich and George were talking about, using features like Studio Assist, it enables you to start doing and being ready to test and test sooner, helping you as the core member of the Agile team. Essentially, one of the pillars in the three Amigos as quality engineers, we can shift left and start performing our activities sooner so we can give faster feedback and learn faster about challenges that we face. So in a nutshell, that's a look at Katalon's capabilities from execution and reporting. Back over to you, Rich.
Well, thanks, Bush. Let me find the screen share button quickly. I think we are on to Q&A. If I can. There we go. Press the button.
So while we wait for the questions to come in, I also want to remind the audience to check out all the documentation and information that we posted on the on the chat window. There is a lot of good information about what Rich and George were talking about, as well as the capabilities that Mush demoed a few minutes ago. There is a couple of questions for either Rich, George, or Mush that needs a little bit of addressing. So the first one is, what skill set do you need to get started with model-based testing? Can you guys elaborate a little bit on that?
Do you want to take that one?
Yep, I just noticed George came off mute.
Yeah, I'll go for it. Yeah. So I mean, typically, turn my camera on as well. Yeah, typically, I think the barrier to entry is quite low. I mean, modeling is a slightly different way of thinking to a lot of the traditional ways of authoring tests. So as long as I think you've got, well, actually, I mean, a lot of the time we see people, if they're already doing modeling in some other way, so maybe they're using BPMN flows or like Visio or Miro boards, then getting started with modeling is quite easy. If you've never done modeling before, there is a small learning curve, I would say. But once you've got the concepts nailed down, typically the benefits and getting started is pretty quick.
Just to add on to that, I think ironically, when we talk about testing skill, what modeling makes you do, it makes you go back to fundamentals of testing, right? And that's analysis. And therefore, that's the strong skill that we're starting to bring out, and people start to understand how systems work. The actual using of the tool is very easy, right? You know how to use Visio, you probably know how to create a visual model. When it comes to automation, you've got options, all right? You can use Modeler to integrate with an execution tool as a full SDET, if you like, and therefore writing code, if you like, or you can go right on the extreme on the other end of using it more like a low-code tool, where actually a lot of those components are built out of accelerators and recorders, and all of that stuff is stored as kind of underlying components that you don't actually need to see. So modeler in itself gives a hell of a lot of flexibility in terms of skill sets and how you actually want to use it. Excellent. Thank you. There's another question. Do you have a Gen AI capability for test data? I think this is for curiosity only. Yeah. So in the same way we've got Model GPT, we've also got Data GPT. It uses in a very similar way. Obviously, as well as being a modeling capability, it's a full-blown test data engine. An enterprise test data engine. And so underlying that, we have a lot of the information around what data an organization holds, what relationships exist within said data stores within organizations, and how that gets proliferated around. You have all that underlying information. You can do a hell of a lot when it comes to feeding that information into LLMs in the same way we've described how you do it with visual models. It works exactly the same way in terms of creating data through AI as well, rather than you've probably seen lots of demos where they produce superficial data through AI. Actually, we've got a hell of a lot of relational information that means we can create a lot of intelligent data. Right.
And last but not least, because we're running a bit out of time, I have 300 plus automated test cases already. Will I need to throw them away?
I think not, right? I think the biggest challenge that comes in with existing test cases is directly related to the maturity speed of the application under test, right? I think as new features are coming in, as testers, I think we have to always eventually look at discarding tests. And I think that's one of the key benefits of having AI as the fourth amigo, which is the pain and the relative effort that goes into creating and then maintaining the tests, right? The relative ROI on that is so simplistic or great now, where it could essentially become throwaway. So your relative effort that you're losing is going to go away. So I think as we move into the future, the concern we typically as testers have is to say, hey, what is the value in all the effort I'm spending to do all of this work? That is quickly diminishing, which means I don't care as a tester if you completely change the requirements tomorrow. I have tools and capabilities now that seamlessly let me adjust and adapt, right? And it truly brings us to an agile environment. Rich, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of ways to answer the question in terms of there is various accelerators which allow you to take your existing test pack and get it into modular, for example, if that's what you're trying to do, right? And AI can assist you in that conversion process. But as you said, Mush, I think one of the important things is almost irrelevant of technology. Have you got the right approach, right? And I think a lot of organizations that we will speak to have solely UI-based end-to-end tests, and therefore there's a hell of a lot of accidental complexity built into what they're doing today. And I think interesting, the thing that you showed earlier on, talking about the flakiness chart, all right? I think that's an interesting one in terms of not just how do you convert the test pack you've got today. Almost you don't want to do that, right? How can you use your capabilities, your underlying AI as an aid to understand what we're doing a bit more? And actually some of those very flaky tests, should we really be doing them? They're probably those end-to-end tests that I've just been moaning about, right? And therefore we should probably take the opportunity to change the approach, and maybe I can stand up an API test to do exactly the same thing. How I actually do it, can I use AI? It's a kind of irrelevant how you do it. What's the quickest way for you to do it? And what's the most effective way, I think, is really how to answer that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one other add-on I would just like to put on there, right, is as you mentioned, from a technology and tooling perspective, like you have converters, right? I'm sure accelerators are there where it says, hey, if I still want to use them because they provide good value, can we convert them into the modular? I think you answered that and said yes. And on the Katalon side, it's exactly the same as well. We have the ability, our partners actually do that all the time. Also the service providers particularly, right, where they can come in and they can actually have accelerators and plugins that allow you to convert from technology X over to the technology that is being used at Katalon as well.
Excellent. So we are officially out of time. So thank you so much, Rich, Mush, and George for being here today and for the insightful conversation. I hope our audience enjoyed. And again, if you join late, the webinar will be available on demand in katalon.com/webinar and also in the Curiosity software page. So please have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.